Hey, Nate, how's it going, sir? Uh-oh,
It's good, man. How are you?
can you hear me? Oh, good, good, good,
I
good.
can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Awesome. Yes, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay.
Good, good, good. Good, good. So excited to see you here. Happy to see everyone hopping in the live stream. Uh, Frankly, I'm pretty excited to go over some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. You are the owner of all things capacity management wise, so can't wait to get into this. But before we do any of that, want to hear about or want to start to delve into um, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do at Microsoft.
Yeah, so my name is Nate Findley. At Microsoft, I'm on the PM side. There's a whole bunch of engineering teams that do great work on the Fabric Capacities platform. So everything that has to do with Fabric Capacities or Power BI Premium Capacities related to usage, workload, new workloads being added, how usage gets in there, how the bill works, capacity metrics app, and everything in between. So there's a lot going on behind what you all see, but yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, one of the things we like to do on the live stream is we'd like to understand, how did Nate become Nate? How did 5-year-old Nate go from like wanting to be a superhero or a firefighter to Nate, the product owner of
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
Fabric?
absolutely. Well, it's pretty obvious. So I wanted to be a professional athlete. So that was
Okay.
my original goal. So I studied, but not like a professional athlete that makes much money. I wanted to be a rock climber, a professional rock climber, back in the day. And I studied physics and math at a college very close to a great rock climbing area, and got really into it. I moved to Seattle in like 1997 to pursue that. Did not make enough money to survive. So um, kind of jumped on the first thing that my neighbor started, which was getting into real estate transactions and BI, which was really us running around on our bicycles from real
Yeah.
estate escrow office to escrow office, finding loans that had not yet been closed that needed to be closed, inputting them into this fantastic technology called Microsoft Access, and using Crystal reports to build our client reports. And it was really interesting, but I had not really gotten into the data side. Physics and math is interesting, and you really, like, the thing that excited me about that was understanding how things work and the framework of how things work. And when I cracked open Microsoft Access in 1997, totally different world. That was kind of the catch of the bug of like, oh, like everything we do in physics, everything behind it is math, and in a lot of the world there's a lot of data behind everything. So it kind of opened my eyes to that. So when we blew up a little early for the dot com, we blew up before the dot-com boom, which was nice. So
Yeah.
that when that blew up in a bad way, I moved over into higher education and kind of dove deeper into just analytics and what can we do with the technology at the time for taking processes that used to be just completely manual on paper and automating them using very basic technology in Microsoft Access and COBOL data stores and everything else. So I had to learn COBOL back in the day, or how to read COBOL, so I could figure out what was there, so we could figure out what to look at, because no one had ever looked at it before. And that kind of transitioned into data mining, which transitioned into your basic descriptive statistics on data that underlied how everything worked at the university that no one had ever looked at. So that was also super exciting. So that parlayed into going to business school to focus in on, again, like, money is a good piece of data, understanding revenue. So I kind of focused in. I got an MBA, focused on finance, but parlayed that directly into getting into cost, which is not as fun as revenue for a lot of people. But for me, cost is where all the data is. We have costs, all the data flows off the costs. And I spent about 5 years doing cost analytics, which is, very much, data heavy, of like data and analytics heavy, of like, how do you understand how a system works? How do you understand how a system costs? How do you take that data and turn it into a story that you can tell and adjust? to understand profit margin, understand efficacy. One of the most exciting findings there was we look at our kind of customers from a perspective, I think at the time I was in investments, we look at our customers in terms of revenue, but when you look at them in terms of profitability, it's a totally different story. And highest revenue customers were not high revenue when you looked at it that way, and vice versa. So that was fun, but I was getting very deep into the cost analytics side, which is technical to a point, but very, very structured, very, very isolated, or very, very pigeonholed. So I went into consulting to spread out and did a bunch of different projects, from Mike's Hard Lemonade to Microsoft, working on BI and analytics exclusively across those, and then moved over to Microsoft on the analytics side. So building out, I moved over to Microsoft in 2010 when it was still on-prem, and kind of went through the whole built out analytics for the server tools business, now cloud and enterprise, and now cloud and AI. But built through all that and went through the whole transition to Azure. And for Microsoft, one of my small claims to fame is figuring out how we look at Azure usage within Microsoft across people who are not on the product team. So that was pretty cool. And but that was still, so again, it's very simple. Like, I like understanding how things work and the framework behind them, physics and math. But then got to do that at Microsoft. But about 4 years ago, I transitioned over to Power BI, which was something we used quite a bit, and just getting into the details of how Power BI works. Power BI Premium Gen 2, the first version of virtualized compute and capacities, was something I got to be part of with Amir, Nets, and others. And it was great. And it's kind of just organically grown from there. So it starts out, tried to be a professional rock climber, failed miserably at that, but took that interest in how things work and the data behind them, and learning about it for myself, and now just helping set up a system that helps other people do the same.
I think that's just such a fascinating story and journey that everyone has in this space. And it's interesting. I now think you might be the third or fourth rock climber that I've had on the live stream. So I don't know if they were all professional aspirations.
Who knows?
But yeah. Do you know Martha Mogan?
I don't.
She's from Finland, Switzerland. I'm sorry, Martha, if you're watching. I don't remember where you're from. But she's running Fabric February.
Oh, nice.
She's one of the organizers of that, and she's a mountain climber. Nice. And I think she's done, I want to say, like something like 167 of the 200 and some odd peaks that are above X elevation or whatever.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah, rock climbing is you don't need cardio as much in rock climbing. So rock climbing, you do, cardio helps, but mountaineering, you absolutely, it's again, but it's one of the reasons why I've actually thought about this too. One of the things with rock climbing, you're constantly looking for, or any sort, or mountaineering even more so, you're constantly assessing data inputs against risk, against capabilities. So you need to understand your capabilities. You need to understand the data that you're getting. You need to make a choice of, is the risk versus the reward. So like, it's all very similar of like, hey, am I going to blow a finger or am I going to die? And that's what it goes into. Now, folks like Alex Honnold on, free soloing, I mean, Half Dome he's done, but it was, oh man, I can't believe I forgot. But Alex Honnold, totally different risk reward, totally different capability set, totally different, internal capabilities. But yeah, it's a lot of rock climbers have some sort of STEM approach, but then there's also the creative aspect to it of like, you're looking at something and making something happen. So dance, rock climbing, all good stuff.
That's fantastic. And I like it. I just find it fascinating. I never correlated to, people working in data and analytics to rock climbing.
Well, I think, Thierry, I forget his last name. He was with SQL and the early stages of Power BI and BI for a long time. Terry Diers, I think, big time mountaineer. So you recognize him when you see him. They're a little cold in the eyes and assessing risk. He's great.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, hey, if you're in YouTube or on LinkedIn or X, if you're into rock climbing or mountaineering, or let us know what the largest mountain you've climbed, or if it's just stairs. How many flights of stairs can you do? Have you done? Why don't we do that as a unique challenge for the chat? And because I'm a bad YouTuber, I always forget. Like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, share with your friends and family, all that good stuff. So, well, we're about to get into it because I know you've got a lot of great content. If you're watching on the live stream, we're doing this for you, right? So for those of you on YouTube, LinkedIn, X, please, if you have questions, post those into the chat. We're happy to get them answered for you. Please, though, preface the question with the cue, and then to make sure that we get them queued up, we are following Guy in the Cube, Matthew Roach rules. So, please, let us know what that. And if you're spamming any questions, one of our moderators, if I have a moderator on, we'll block you and prevent you from posting. So please don't spam stuff. All right. Now we're about to get into it. This is our lunch and learn. So we're going to grab our beverage of choice, or be it coffee or Kickstart or Dicey Liquid Death on your side, or water it is. And we're going to take our communal drink and then we'll get into it. So. All right, Nate, we're here to talk capacities. What do you got for us? How do we get
do you want to start with how capacities work or the licensing profile? Those are two, both of them work, but whichever your preference is.
Let's start with how they work.
Okay.
I think that's a great place to start because, well, frankly, I don't think a lot of people understand how.
Yeah. So let me walk through, and Chris, I'm sharing my screen. You can see it. That basically, and I'll probably go through this fast, but please, ask questions, Chris, or anybody on the call as well. But basically, so there's Microsoft Fabric, which is a SaaS approach to bringing in a lot of data and analytics workloads into one spot. And the power behind all this is universal compute capacities. And this is one of the many decks that I have on the matter. But what you buy is you're actually buying a capacity, but the capacity is connected to all these other things. And the power for them to work or not comes from that capacity. So we've gone through a ton of many metaphors from, I think a paginated bear had, candy store, a really great really great metaphor for candy stores. We went through F1 metaphors, but one that I've settled on, at least for this presentation, is, personal computing. Like a capacity is kind of like a PC. When you buy a PC, you decide how much CPU you want, depending on what you want to do. If you're a gamer or if you're a writer, you're going to make different choices on that front. And the same thing with Fabric capacities. Like when you're buying a capacity, you're buying compute in the terms of capacity units, but you're buying as much that you think you need, right? In terms of depending on what you're doing. So if you're running a giant data warehouse for a huge organization with lots of data running fast, you're going to buy a bigger one than if you're doing BI in a smaller organization with perhaps a lower data profile. Similarly, on a PC side, your cores can be used for any application you install. For Fabric capacities, your compute can be used for any workload on Fabric. So there's no limits. In the PaaS world, you're making choices of what BI technology do I spin up? Data warehouse, Spark, ML, pipelines, ADF, or Azure Data Factory. You're making individual choices and individual sizing decisions on each one of those. In Fabric, you're making one sizing decision, how much do I need? And then you can use as much as you want from up to your capacity limits from one or all of the Fabric workloads. And the last part of the metaphor is, and I'll pause after this slide, because I don't want to just ramble on, but the last part is like, okay, in a PC, when you're doing a bunch of stuff, and I did turn off everything else before this live stream, but in a PC, you can see how close to memory, how close are you to running out of memory or CPU. And when you get closer to the CPU limit, 95%, 90%, you're going to start getting slowed down and things are going to start to fail or get messed up. Capacities are almost the same way, except the capacities actually run on virtualized compute. We don't dedicate, when you buy 64 units of capacity, we don't go in the back end and say, these 64 capacity units are yours. It's part of a shared pool. So when you don't actually experience a physical overload. when you reach your capacity limits and go beyond them for a time, then we'll start slowing you down and eventually rejecting job requests when they come in. So that's the kind of metaphor in a nutshell, Chris. And I can go through more into it, but I'll pause there.
I think that makes sense, because what that, and correct me if I'm wrong, by having these virtualized cores and compute available, that means you can dynamically allow many different projects or processes to run at any given time, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's kind of works on both sides, right? Like it allows Microsoft to optimize and give a better experience for operations coming in. So when you think of like the back end in Microsoft, it's instead we're optimizing larger clusters against operations coming in and trying and figuring out how we can do them as fast as possible. On the data warehouse side, they have a query optimizer. On Spark, they have the same thing. On Power BI, we have a long-standing pattern of how do we best execute operations. And it's much more efficient and faster to do that in a large pool than in a small pool. And then for customers, it's the same idea. So we're kind of eliminating waste and allowing more performance on the Microsoft side. And the same thing on the customer side. You can, there are less management points, and you're able to do anything you want in a capacity, up to the bounds of the capacity limits. And the experience you're getting on the other side is very fast performance, typically faster than you would get in a dedicated model, especially as you approach overload. So it's allowing customers to do more, and ideally eliminating waste where they would have had 10 different things, they can have one. So that eliminates waste right there. And same thing on the Microsoft side, but instead of waste, it's like gained efficiency and gained performance.
How does that work? And I mean, I get you have shared compute, and then you get these huge service centers, and but if I'm in Power BI, I'm in one region, right? And I don't know about you, but every time I've looked at when people load data, there's this huge spike between midnight and like 8 a.m. every single day.
Yep.
How do you handle that distribution of processing inside of Microsoft's data center? Because I'd imagine a region is a region.
Yeah,
so it's going to get.
That's interesting, and this is actually an area that's always evolving, because you want to stay ahead of it, right? If you get behind it, everybody will notice. Yeah, so we just like anything else, it's not like we're not optimizing to like, and I'm not the expert in this area, but we are not optimizing to like razor thin capability, razor thin regional stability, but we definitely don't want to play that game. But we are balancing between, and we basically took all the dedicated, and this is kind of history lesson. We had like, let's say we had 1 million cores of, or maybe 100,000 cores of formally dedicated Power BI kind of areas. We started out with like, okay, we're going to have 100,000. We just went up and said, okay, we're going to have 100,000 cores. But those 100,000 cores are not always used at the same time, even within a region. And so then we balanced it over time. And we're doing the work of balancing to the peak load. Like we're having to do the hardware work, or not the hardware, we're having to do the cloud work of making sure that we can always handle the peak load plus a significant buffer. And that's something we're always working with. So we're just like customers are monitoring their PaaS or IaaS services in Azure. We're doing the same thing on the back end for Power BI as a whole, based on customer behavior. So if folks are loading data at night, we have the capacity to support that. And then if folks are doing in a region, right, and if folks are doing a lot of interactive activity during the day, we need to make sure we have capacity to support that. And then we're adding a buffer on top of it. So whatever the mean line is, we have a buffer on top of it. And we actually are we don't adjust that super frequently, because we want to make sure we have stability, and we don't want to get caught in a downswing when there's an upswing.
Right. No, and I guess that makes sense. And does that play into? I mean, there's something, I don't know. Do you know who Mim is? Okay, he just joined Microsoft.
Yes.
So if you've seen him around the halls, say hello.
I think he's in New Zealand. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But he posted a few articles about something, I think it's called bursting or something like that. Is that something you could go into more detail on how that works?
Absolutely, and that is in the purview of my team. So what a setup question. How do we know? No, but it's true. The bursting and smoothing is something, so I'm just going to skip ahead on these slides to actually I can't
keep
I
forgetting.
can't skip these slides because to get to bursting, I'll just do it in order and then we'll get to bursting and smoothing. But this is an area where, there are tons of questions because it's not always obvious. And one of the things we're trying to do is kind of make sure that we get more guidance and learning opportunities and assets out there for folks. But, the goal of Capacities, it's SaaS, it's always on, works really great, which is awesome to say, but hard to do. Let's say everybody loads overnight and it spikes like crazy. And how do I know I'm going to fit? And especially if you're enhancing those loads by even accelerating them more with bursting, which I'll explain in a second, like that could be very risky. But the first thing to build the story, it's always on autopilot. And we don't want people to worry about, I actually messed up your setup. I kind of went into my excitement out of the back end and how it understands. But in a capacity context, what we're trying to do is make sure that you don't have to worry about scheduling. So the way that we do that, if you hit 5, and there's 2 aspects of it. One is, are the jobs performant? And 2, can you fit them in your capacity and know that they'll fit? So the first one is, are they performant? We have virtualized compute. We're optimizing for an operation, and operations are isolated from each other. So if you're running 5 big ETLs, all the operations in those ETLs are handled independently. They're not conflicting with other ETLs. And this is the next thing that goes into this is, okay, that's great. We have performance, but that is not ideal for perhaps a customer if they run them all at once, because all the capacity hits at once, all the usage hits at once. So we actually smooth it over time. So we're eliminating, and we smooth it over 24 hours. And then we also have, but we also aren't limiting it to that. We also want peak performance. So we want to smooth it so you don't have to worry about when you run it. We also don't want to slow you down. So we actually accelerate you with bursting in that virtualized compute. We can apply more to it for peak performance. And actually, I think the best way I'll just kind of go through, I'll skip ahead and we can go back, is really just looking at an example, like an animated example of, in a capacity, we do bursting, which allows you to use more than the face value. So if you bought a 64 unit capacity, we will apply more. If we determine that adding more compute is going to make that faster, we will. So the first job would have tipped over a 64 unit capacity, as would the second and third jobs. And we're going to execute those in the first 2 time windows very quickly because of bursting. But so the execution is fast. But then the smoothing, we actually spread those out over time. So you're still executing in those first 2 windows, but then we're smoothing that out in the future. So we're taking those peaks and spreading them out into the future, which is great. And that's Power BI. You'll kind of see this. It's like, 5, 10, 15, 20 windows, you're smoothing them out. But for large batch jobs like Power BI dataset refreshes, any data warehouse or data engineering operation, we treat those as kind of large batch jobs or background, and we smooth them over 24 hours. So those large ETL jobs are typically going to be, or large jobs for data overnight, dataset refreshes are typically going to be smoothed over 24 hours, or always smoothed over 24 hours. So you don't have to worry if you run them all at night or in the morning. We're kind of doing that smoothing approach to make sure that we are kind of keeping the promise of, like, we're going to burst your behavior. We're going to burst your usage so you get more performance than your capacity. So your performance looks, oh my God, we're using all the CU and we're getting great performance, but wow, I'm concerned because I'm over my limit. But the smoothing makes it more amenable of actually fitting into a capacity. So that's how it works.
So just something that popped into my head. Has there been any consideration around like 24 hours being the right number of hours versus something like maybe it should be smoothed out over 20? Because if it runs in a period of time, you don't want the smoothing to impact the next day. Like maybe run it or 23 hours.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I think that's a good comment. We've talked about the length of smoothing. I don't think we would lower it for background jobs, because 24 hours, like, that guarantees that we're in a day. So if you run one big job in a day and let's say you have one job on one capacity, and let's say you've optimized everything, so that job smoothed over 24 hours is going to take up 90% of the capacity. We're kind of optimizing to make sure you can fit as much into the capacity as possible. Now, if you have 2 jobs so we're kind of optimizing for that day range of like making sure that you're getting the full, you're fitting as much into capacity as you can. If we go to 20 hours and you have one job in one capacity, you might need a slightly bigger capacity to fit it in there, but then you're also going to have dead time of like there's going to be 3 hours or 4 hours where you're not getting any benefit. So our big concern was making sure that folks didn't have to worry about time of day. We did not want folks to worry about when they run jobs based on how it counts against their capacity limits. We want them to run jobs when it makes sense for them versus worrying about the capacity accounting.
No, and I think that makes good sense. I guess maybe the thought is like 23 hours and 59 minutes from the point of start of a job. I don't know. I'm just trying to like not hit the next.
Since this is a luncheon, since this is conversational, right? This is conversational.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty easy. There's been a lot of in the world. There are a lot of times where we've gotten too smart and ended up with something that didn't work. So there's also that concern of like, hey, this is basic. We know we're going to do. We know we're going to do it, and we know we're going to do it right, and then we're going to learn and optimize from it. But we haven't had a ton more feedback on. I mean, everybody would want it to be done over infinity, but there's not that.
But no, I definitely get it, and I want to have like a cap on it. I didn't know if you could like be just a smidge smarter on larger processes to like not run into each other.
Yeah, actually, totally fair. And I think on that same theme, it's for larger processes, yes, but I think there's also of like being. Then I think we'd have to be a little more specific about like defining large processes. I would say it's still a little bit broad brush right now, like every data set refresh, every data warehouse operation, every data engineering, data science operation are all background, which is great. But we haven't dug deeper on that side yet, but we've definitely talked about it.
What happens when like, okay, we're going along and we do a bursting and you start to smooth, and then I pause my fabric capacity. What happens to that smoothing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. On this, so what happens when you pause? The intention is that. So obviously, you automatically stop consuming any more capacities. You're not going to load up any more smoothing, and the mechanics. There'll be more information coming out in the future about how the mechanics work with the future smoothing, but it would just it would effectively come due. But we have more guidance coming on that soon. Right now, it actually is not, but that's changing very soon.
Okay. Well, fair enough. I was just wondering, like, is there something there that got or how that happens?
Actually, I'd have to check on exactly how much we shared on that. But yeah, it happens logically, right? Like if you have a debt, you pay it. But then you're cleared out, so you can pause and go away for whatever smoothing happens. Pause, go away for a while, come back. Capacity is at 0, good to go. So
awesome. Well, that's fantastic. I think I sent an email. Someone saying, I guess I would like ability to pay for whatever overcapacity was. Like when there was an issue, let's say smoothing was impacting things, could I pay to get out of it? But that's not in the service.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There are. So one of the things we've made some changes in throttling, which we can talk through. But like I talked earlier about, like, hey, when you hit your limit, after a time we start injecting delays, and now we actually reject. So you'll see after you've consumed and actually I probably have to go through a couple more slides, but after you've consumed, we'll go through the throttling and kind of how throttling works and how smoothing relates to it in a minute. But we've had a lot of feedback in terms of throttling and having more insight into when's that going to happen and how can I get out of it. If I'm in a throttled state, is there a quick, easy button? And I don't care if I have to pay for it, some people say. How can I get out of it? And that's something that we have some ways today, and we can talk through them. But it's definitely something we're focused on in terms of giving customers ways to, if they do get in a bind on, hey, we use way more than we thought. What can we do? And that's top of mind for us.
Well, that's fantastic. And we've got a question from the audience here. This is not a stupid question, but Priyanda is asking, stupid question, is bursting only applicable for new fabric capacities or existing Gen 2 with auto scaling?
That is a great question, and it's not a stupid question because a lot of people have it, which kind of gets to us getting more information out there in the docs, in Docs and Learn and other resources. Because it's not a mystery if you're really, really deep in it in the product team, but not everything gets out, and that this is one of those areas. But no, it's bursting has actually always existed. The virtualized compute. It's actually way easier just to have we kind of did it on purpose, right? Of like, hey, we could limit everybody so you can never use more than what you paid for, and your experience isn't going to be as good. And then but then you're going to have all this this white space that's unused, and that would be a detractor. We don't want you to have to buy for your spikes. We actually want you to have to buy closer to the average. So so we actually bursting has always existed, and in Power BI Premium Gen 2, not Gen 1. And it exists for all Fabric capacities as well. So this is not new to the world for Power BI Premium Gen 2. It's always been there. And the reason we did that is to allow customers to not have pain on Monday mornings from 8 to 9 a.m. and then wasted space the rest of the time, right? Like that was a big deal for us. So we wanted to allow them to have more flexibility and not have specifically like this capacity. Looking at this made up graph, this capacity is right sized with smoothing, and the customer gets zero throttling and zero throttling impact. But if we were looking at it in terms of unsmooth usage and just spiking, all right, I can see it. There we go. Yeah. So this graph, that's okay. Yeah. So this graph is on the left is like, hey, if we weren't smoothing and we're bursting you as well, you'd be experiencing a lot of pain. And you'd also for an hour, and then you'd have a lot of open space and then a lot of pain in open space. But if I look at the smoothing of kind of this example, this is actually a well-sized capacity based on just the chart I have on the screen. But you get no pain on the right. You get no pain because of smoothing, and on the left you do get pain from if we were actually did throttle on the left side. So it was important for us to make sure that again you didn't have to worry about trying to time out when these spikes happen versus other things, and then kind of making it a more SaaS product, and it just works.
Gosh, I like this a lot. I am a big fan of this. At one point in time, I forget who I saw a presentation on, but they talked about hoteling of processes and pausing processes while other things were happening. Is that still a thing, or does bursting and smoothing take care of it, or does bursting and smoothing make that more complex? Can you talk about
just like what's your context for pausing processes?
Yeah, the context was like, okay, I'm loading a table and users come in to start to interact with a report, or they want to do something that's front end user based, maybe it's run a Apache report or something. They would hotel a load process, allow the user in to do something, and then they just pick up that load process. Is that still a thing, or is that dead?
It's not top of mind for sure in terms of how it works, because with bursting and smoothing, the goal is like we're not doing anything for resource constraints. We're working from a customer perspective. We're working in basically a resource free environment. I have one asterisk on that so we would never pause anything to allow for something else to run, because again, they're independent. On a data set refresh or kind of in that, I don't actually know the depth of exactly what works there. But yeah, it's not in terms of capacity management. It's not something that is super concerning. The asterisks on that I was just going to say, and I see some questions popping in, Chris, that you're reading. The asterisks on that is Spark and DW. Like there are some compute limits. Like analysis services has a physical limit per operation based on the architecture. Data warehouse and Spark have put in some limits in place as well, just to make sure that if you buy like an F16, you don't have you have a limit to how far you can burst, because some operations we might say, hey, the optimal compute for this operation is infinity. Use everything, right? We do have some limits on workloads where you could get an infinite answer for how much compute would work. So,
right. Well, and maybe that actually leads into Jack's question here. He's asking, hey, as a small organization that's currently using Pro and PPU license, is there a calculation how to size a fabric capacity?
Jack, good question. And actually, this one is kind of tough. And I would love. Let's assume that he's Pro and PPU, so he's using mostly BI workloads, right? So for BI workloads, we do have a. Let me just adjust the slides that Chris is not showing, which is actually a lot cleaner, Chris, than kind of watch me bounce around in slides. The for Pro and PPU, that's an interesting question because it really depends on what your goals are. Like a PPU scenario, like Pro is BI, right? So if everybody is Pro, they can already use Power BI as they would, right? So for PPU, that's to get access to everybody already has Pro, and then you're paying additional, $10 a user plus whatever discount you have to have access to PPU, and you can use Power BI resources. If the entire group has all Pro and PPU licenses, $20 a user per month, less discounts or before discounts. Then if you're only using Power BI aspects, then it really is not. It's really not something. It depends on your use case. If you want to start using other things besides just Power BI related capabilities, because Pro and PPU are Power BI only. If you want to start using Fabric capabilities, then it starts to get into the approach for you already have Pro licenses, so you can use a Fabric workload. You can start to use Power BI workloads in Fabric, or you can use other workloads in Fabric too. The only sticky part, Jack, to your question is how do you know how much you're using right now? Because both Pro and PPU, you pay a license fee. You have no idea how much usage is going on behind the scenes. So I would suggest you start by getting a trial for getting a Fabric trial, which is free and currently runs as if it was an F64, but it'll give you an idea of how much and runs and put some test cases on it to see how much usage it has. That's one example. Because I'm assuming you're on Pro PPU because you're small, and a P1 is just, the $5,000 pre-discount or before discount on a P1 is just too much for a small company to handle. We totally get it. That's why PPU came about. In Fabric, really, PPU and Pro might work for you, or you might want to do a smaller F2, F4, F8, F16 capacity. But you really should do a trial and see how much of those processes you have fit in there. And depending on the size of your company, it kind of depends on how much value you get from it, like how much value you're getting from the Fabric processes, and is it worth the trade-off with Power BI pricing? So yeah, great question. Sorry, I don't have like an exact answer on it, but the Pro PPU, you don't actually see how much usage you do, or there might be questions with other Fabric workloads of, hey, I'm in Spark, or I have, I'm using a different technology that I want to kind of migrate to something in Fabric. Because the capacity model is so different, the trial is kind of a good first POC stop, and we are working on guidance internally to Microsoft that will get external in terms of how to think about sizing kind of Fabric workloads. So yeah.
Well, and that's a great question, and I think there's another follow-on question here that I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to ask you to rate my response to how good it is. All right. So this is something a little different, and I'm actually even going to show it. Okay. So and Jack, I think this will answer your question too. But Andrew's coming in. He's asking, my company's on Power BI shared capacity where everyone has a Pro license. If we move those reports to an F SKU, will you be able to use up our capacity throughput on reports that are currently free? Because it's all in the Pro capacity. And so I am going to switch over to my computer, and I'm going to talk about, I think the answer is in workspace capacity management. And so if I go into my reports and I look at how I've broken out my reports, and maybe I could zoom in here, I would have my reports session here, right? Right here. This would stay in my PPU capacity because this, oh man, I gotta hide that. You can't see what I'm saying. Hide that. This report workspace is a premium per user capacity. What this would allow me to do is have all my front end reports and my semantic models that are in this workspace running off of my premium per user capacity or my pro capacity, right? I would then also separate out my data sets or my semantic models, like I renamed this, into, in this case, I'm doing premium premium content. But if we're trying to do premium per user pro and minimize our fabric spend, I keep this in the PPU or pro space. And then for fabric, I would use my lake house and I'd separate out my lake house content. Oops, it's not it. Where's it? Here it is. I'd separate out my fabric lake. Oh, look at this. This is new. Holy crap. Look at that, guys. That's awesome. Oh, sorry. I would have my fabric content and the content over in a workspace that is managing through an FSKU. Nate, how does that sound?
It sounds good, but I think it depends on the context of the question. So if the question was, I have pro, was more to Jack's question of I have pro and PPU, and how do I manage that in an FSKU environment for reports that are currently free? You would you answer that question very well. Of like, hey, you have your data, you have your wherever your data is being processed is kind of where the capacity counts. And if it's on a pro or PPU license, it counts, but you don't have a limit because it's pro and PPU. If it's on a Fabric capacity, the compute would go against it. But Andrew's question might be a little bit different because they have he mentioned a Power BI shared capacity, which means a Power BI shared capacity has to be a P1 or above. So if it's a P1 or above, and everyone already has a pro license too, the pro license means anybody can publish to a shared capacity because you always need a pro license to publish Power BI content. Just kind of that's how it was set up in the beginning, and that's how it persists today. But that's only for Power BI content. So if you're on a P1 and everybody has a pro license, everybody can publish, and everybody could view all the reports in a P1, regardless of if they had a pro license or not. And if you moved a P1 to an F64, it would work exactly the same way. So there is no difference between a P1 and an F64 in, and those are the P1 is the lowest tier Power BI premium SKU, and F64 is the equivalent tier in the Azure Fabric world. So you could move them over to, you could just switch your workspaces over to a F64, and it would work. And I think throughput capacity, we use our capacity throughput in reports that are currently free. If those reports are hosted on a Power BI premium data set, they're already using capacity with open report functions and everything else. And the same would persist on SQ. If the data set resides in a pro environment shared to another pro user, then it wouldn't count against capacity because it's not residing on the capacity.
Okay. I mean, honestly, I think that makes sense. And let me see if I could summarize. So we have different capacities that we could now think about leveraging. We've got our pro capacity, which is what you get through your pro license.
Your pro user license. It's not a capacity.
Your pro or PPU user licenses. There's capacity there, but that's all the BI side. Right. Then we have premium capacities or F capacities.
Yep.
That we can break out and manage at the workspace level. So we could organize, like if we have a P1 and we want that for BI workloads, we could keep all of our P1 capacities there. And then we could add F capacities down below, or we could put it into a general mishmash. Is that?
That's right. And I think
general
mishmash, that's totally right. And general mishmash can be a really good thing or a really bad thing, depending on what you're trying to do. Right. Like if you're doing BI and analysis and it's not dependent on production, you can merge those. But like we often see folks separate out, different processing layers. So for things. So for example, in that P1, let's say your P1 is getting very pinned and you want to move all your kind of more data operations over to a smaller FSKU capacity, you can totally do that. And you still keep the unlimited distribution from a P1, or if you already have pro licenses, it doesn't matter. But you're running your processing elsewhere and kind of that's the good thing about, we heard loud and clear that we need smaller increments than just a $5,000 starting point SKU. So we have that as well. So yeah.
And that is fantastic, because that means you could spin up an F2 at what, $250, $200 a month or whatever it is, and use it for all sorts of workloads. I'm going to ask the question from LinkedIn. I don't know if you know this one, and you can definitely tap out on this one. But Sergio is asking, when previewing data flows online in Power BI, what error messages do not admins get that indicate you're maxing out your capacity? Maybe your messages are not very detailed, i.e., hey, if I'm going over that load and I'm going into bursting, how can I tell?
Yeah. So the bursting doesn't apply. Like bursting and smoothing are just like, let's say in the first 30-minute increment, you ran 100 CU, and it doesn't matter if it was in 1 minute or 5 minutes, right? That 100 CU is going to show up over, if it's a background operation, will be smoothed out over 24 hours. So it's more about the accounting. Like you start to get, I can take this question. Let me make sure I can find it. There it is. Yeah. I got it. No, I got it. Okay. So Sergio, number one, you probably experienced some not great error messages about a month ago, and the error messages hopefully have gotten better. We put a lot of work into getting error messages up and running when throttled. You only get error messages when something gets rejected. Right now, we're not like somebody using a data flow does not get you get a surfaced error message of this job was rejected. Or before, it might have been a lot more gobbledygook than that, but now it should be, this job was rejected because your capacity has reached its limits, So that would be we did definitely get caught on that. We had some less consistent, less clear error messages floating around, and we made sure the error messages did exist, and then we've been working on cleaning them up since. So yeah,
that's fantastic. And David's got a question about would an F capacity be ideal for dev and test workspaces? Essentially, workspaces with infrequently used semantic models.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's interesting. I mean, I think if you have pro licenses, and like if you're in dev and test, you have to have a pro license because you're publishing, right? And you're testing.
Yeah.
You're typically going to have a pro license anyway to publish on it. So yeah, if you wanted to size down and just do dev and test, and you would need a pro license to view it, but if it's a dev environment and everybody's a pro license, you can size it to what you need. You would also see all the usage, but the size of the SKU doesn't totally, depends what you're doing. There are some of those upper constraints, like I said, of like Data Warehouse and Spark do have some constraints, so you can't use infinite, and it's tied to the SKU size. But you can see how much compute is being used in those F capacities. So you said semantic models, so I'm assuming it's a Power BI scenario. So yeah, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, I think because the recommendation has always been to use PPU for your dev and test, and the premium for your production capacities. I would be interested to know how many PPU licenses you'd be looking to eliminate at the lower levels to make that affordable, especially because most of the people that I know who are
the mechanics, the financial mechanics on that might not make sense. If you're doing it for PPU, might not make sense. And that kind of gets back to one of the earlier questions from Jack, but because PPU serves a place, like it will run Power BI. You can always do dev on that. I think if you're using Fabric scenarios, or if you're using Fabric workload, like additional non-Power BI workloads, you have to go to an F SKU. You can go to your P SKU, which is starts at a higher price point than an F SKU. And also, if it's infrequently used, if you go to an F SKU and you're trying to save money, you can pause. So there's that too. But and I think the only other difference in the scenario of using PPU versus F SKU, and the financial mechanics don't necessarily make those equal. So besides Fabric SKUs, being able to see the usage in the capacity metrics app from your dev and test environment of like, hey, this morning we ran, we think is going to move to production, or we're looking at these operations. What does it look like? Will it fit? That would be another scenario for that.
Okay, that's a good call. Good call out. Oh, great questions today, everybody. Keep them coming. Sahil is asking, when should we use direct link over import? We have RLS currently enabled, but it's not visible in direct link mode. Do you know? Is
I
this
am not an
more
expert.
of a Christian Wade
Chris,
question?
yeah, that's more of a Christian Wade question.
Okay.
Although Chris, you probably have a better chance of giving a high level on that if you have one. I do not.
Yeah. So I think I thought you could still use direct link as long as you've defined the RLS within the model itself. It'll still work because it's a semantic model, and those filters and rules that you create and apply would apply there. From everything I've seen and heard, that's how that works. But it is, one link does not yet have the ability to add in row level security directly on that. So if you're like linking and sharing tables inside of one link, it's not going to innately inherit the RLS today. Right? They've talked about that being on the roadmap, and if Alex is in the chat, or if anyone can post the roadmap timeline out there, like Donald, I think that's out there for an answer. So, excellent. Let's see. We got another question from Ricardo. Power BI desktop semantic models has a 1 gig limit. What would you recommend when the semantic module is larger than 1 gig when moving to Fabric?
Off the top of my head, it's a good question, Ricardo, and valid. I believe the P. Well, okay, so you have 100 terabytes, 100 terabytes limit. Like that, we have very, very favorable. I would say a Power BI desktop semantic model is 1 gigabyte limit. That's a good question because that gets in more the creator space, which I haven't been in for a while. So
I think I can field that one. A couple different paths, and again, we are talking the Power BI use versus, or the semantic model and the reporting use versus the backend Fabric, or all of the other Fabric capacities are out there. So in Power BI, it's a little bit of a special situation. So you can go from Pro to PPU. When you're talking Pro, that I thought the limit was 10 gigs, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's 1. When you go to PPU, definitely, that size goes up to 100 gigs. Now, by default, it'll be set up as a small model inside of your workspace. You can go into settings and you can change that model to be set up as, and let me see if I can even pull that up quick.
Yeah, and Donald Parrish in the chat is dropping all the right links in on some of these questions. The burstable capacity, like what are some warehouse limits he's got in there, and then he's also got the semantic model skew limitations queued up there, which is great.
Oh, that's awesome. Here we go. Let me just quick turn on my screen so we can pull that up. All right, so inside of a data set, so I just went into the semantic models, and oh, look, that changed too. There is a large semantic model storage format. If you click on this, it will turn the model size format up, so you can actually scale that up to those larger size models. You used to control this at a workspace level. They just turn that off. You just do it at the semantic model level from here on out. So be aware that is out there. Awesome, great question. Boy, you guys are crushing it here. All right, good. And hang on. He has a follow-up question. Is the model size expanded size or the compressed PBX size? Good question. What we're talking about is the amount of memory available as data is being pulled out to interact with, right? So it's always going to keep your data in that very small compressed size, and then Power BI is going to pull it out as it starts to use it and need it for visualizing data, and then it's going to drop it and put it back into compressed. That larger model size is what what will open up that threshold size to that larger size. Now, you don't want to put 100 gigs of compressed model into your model. In fact, I mean, like Chris Webb maybe has figured out a way to actually cram 100 gigs of compressed data into it, but it's completely useless at that point because you have no way to uncompress to visualize it to then recompress, right? So that's where that fits. All right. Oh, well, awesome. All right. Well, we have been kind of crushing it with questions here. Nate, in the last 5 minutes here, is there anything specific you would really want to make sure that people understand and know, something that like you would really want everyone to be aware of?
I think for the context of this, I'm just kind of looking at my my kind of walking deck that I carry on this. We probably should go a little bit through finishing out smoothing and going
That'd be
through,
okay. Good. Yeah.
just because that's one. This is one where it's simple, but it can get confusing. So I do want to go through this just one more time and then just
Okay.
hit on throttling, because the impact, you need understanding how this works helps you understand, hey, when I get throttled, what do I do? So we have the example of, hey, all these jobs would kill the capacity, but we smooth them over a shorter number of time windows because they're interactive, not background. But if a background jobs comes in, we smooth that over a much longer term, so you're still getting this increased performance, and we're smoothing it out longer. Can you still overload a capacity? You can. You can go up to, like, the first six jobs here is not going to overload it, but the seventh job is, and I don't know why I made it like a pyramid. I just did. But on this, what we're doing, you used to get throttled right when you hit the limit, but we've changed that, so we actually start pushing usage into the future. So if you're overusing, we just find an empty slot in the future and drop it in, and that's a way to just allow you to further use some of that white space in your capacity. But it also means we're changing it's important to know what percent you're consuming up to your limit. But then once you hit your limit and you've gone over your limit and you're functioning over your limit, you really need to think about the amount of future periods that are filled, because we changed how we think about how you exceed your limit. So if you exceed your limit for 0 to 10 minutes, nothing happens. Everything runs. Jobs are treated as normal. If you fill up the next 10 minutes, we will start to delay you. So that means you've used 10 minutes more than the capacity that you have. So we'll start to inject a delay, and it's a 20-second delay, but it's just consistent, just a 20-second delay. After you fill up the next 60 minutes, we will start rejecting reports on the Power BI side with an error message that is, you've reached your capacity limit. This report's rejected. Please, contact your administrator and/or wait. And then if you fill up the next 24 hours, we'll reject everything, including, dataset refreshes for Power BI. It's important to note that, like, dataset refreshes, data warehousing activities, Spark activities, don't stop running until you hit the 20. New ones don't get rejected until you hit 24 hours. We always do execute the jobs, and that's important. And then remedying overload, we're looking for other ways to kind of improve this, as we talked about a little earlier in the call. But you can upgrade, you can wait, or you can work with high load project owners on that. So it's we have a capacity metrics app, which I'm not going to get into today, but that is the tool to understand how you're using capacities. And that's important to know. Just kind of getting a feel for your capacity usage is really important.
No, actually that's a great call out. I did not realize that there was actual interactive rejects that could occur. That what has been your feedback?
So less people are getting. Let me see. Are you still there, Chris?
On that.
Okay, you back?
Sorry.
Okay, yeah. So what's the feedback?
Apologies there.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, no worries. So the feedback for all the people who are 10 minutes or below, we actually reduce throttling. Like, the amount of customers that experience throttling, and Donald Parrish is killer on the link master. That's great. The number, we used to have, some large double-digit percentage of, multiple double digits as a percentage, 20, 30, in a week or a day. 20 or 30% of capacities would be throttled at some point because they crossed that line. So they'd have degraded performance for 5 minutes. or degraded performance for 2 minutes, or degraded performance for 3 minutes, right? And so we've reduced the total amount of throttling from, 20, 30, 40% in any given period to single digits percentage of folks that are experiencing throttling. But those single digits are more likely to hit interactive reject because their usage is exceeding their capacity size, and they are not happy with being rejected. So I'd say for the general, and that makes sense, right? Like our communication on that could have, was definitely could have been better. And we're looking at kind of enhancing the communication paths in general across all of Fabric for how do we communicate more. Is there a better single communication pane or better communication panes for folks? So yeah, so that was part of it. We have a late arriving question.
Not that question, but I would agree with this, so I want to sneak this in. But as an admin, it'd be great if we could kill some of these things, or have much more control over just like, you know what, you can't run this anymore, right? Like,
yeah,
so when Tom comes in, and apologies to literally just grab that name out of nowhere. There's no Tom up there that I'm thinking of. But when he comes in and runs this job that crushes my capacity and blows everyone on my capacity out of the water, I'd like to be able to say, okay, Tom, you can't run that job anymore. And if he starts it, I want to be able to go in and kill it.
So
that'd be
great question. Top of mind for us.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can say on that.
Okay. Excellent. Well, right. Nate and everyone, we are over time, and I understand. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you all for coming in. Everybody, you have or any parting words, Nate?
Nope, I already said it. It's parting words were like, understand throttling and smoothing, and use the metrics app to keep an eye on it.
Awesome. Well, Nate, thank you very much for coming. Thank you all for joining us. You guys have a great day.
Chris, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye.
Boy, I'm really bad at this. I didn't even have my button ready. Oh, see you guys later. Baker Tilly Digital combines strategic industry insight and advanced technical expertise to uncover and solve your digital transformation challenges. If you're interested in learning more, check out our website at bakertilly.com/digital.